Hello everyone and welcome back to Radio Silence. I'm Shahid. In part 2 of my analysis of the Crusades in modern popular culture, I'll be talking about the Crusades in video games. And the first video game that I really like to analyze is Assassin's Creed. The original Assassin's Creed video game was set in the period of the Third Crusade in the Holy Land in 1191. And you play the character of Desmond Miles, who through a machine called the Animus relives the genetic memories of his ancestor Altair. And through this plot device, what emerges is details about the struggle between two factions, the Assassin Brotherhood and the Templar Order. Now, the Assassin Brotherhood is inspired by the Order of Assassins, and the Templar Order is inspired by the Knights Templar military order, both of which were real entities during the time of the Crusades. Assassin's Creed is a stealth-based game. So essentially in this video game, you need to conduct violence in a discreet way to draw the least possible attention, otherwise you'll be overwhelmed by enemies. That is how the game is designed. And again, it is very interesting that this series that has spawned multiple iterations and has continued into multiple generations of video games would begin with the Crusades. And so it sort of supports our understanding of the Crusades as being an event that resonates with everything that is modern, with everything that can be marketable, with everything that can be introduced to people and that can be expected to be liked. So to give you a better understanding of what the video game is about and the ideas that are motivating it, especially in the context of the Crusades, let us talk about the two factions that move forward the plot. The first is the Assassin Brotherhood. Now, the Assassin Brotherhood actually existed, and they have their origins in the Ismaili Shia sect. The Ismailis were a very radical Shia sect, and their bone of contention with mainstream Shia thought was that they believed that the seventh Imam was not done justice to, and he was not given the imamat after his father, and so they believed that was an injustice done. And so in that way they sort of created their own sect within the Shia school of thought. And the Assassin Brotherhood emerged from the Ismaili group. The Ismailis believed in assassinations and they believed in using violence in order to gain their means. Now, it's very important to recognize that the Ismaili sect today, the modern Ismaili sect that is found in South Asia, in Europe, it is very different from the Ismailis back then. Now the Ismailis are a very wealthy sect. The Aga Khan leads the Ismailis, a very westernized gentleman who has dedicated a lot of his time and a lot of his money to charity and to peace work and to promote goodwill among people and to encourage global prosperity. And obviously that does not prevent him from being one of the wealthiest men in the world with some of the biggest interests in very exotic things such as horse racing and such as yacht sailing. But one can say that that's a small injustice compared to what other people are doing and the amount of money that the other people are making. But anyways, back then, when an assassination needed to be carried out, the Nizari Ismailis, they ate powdered hemp leaves, which in the local language you call hashish or hash. And now this drug contains a natural psychoactive component. So it sort of alters your state of mind. And this was the drug. Hashish was a drug that they used before going on an assassination mission. Now, the assassination was often planned to be carried out in a crowded location so that it would maximize the potential religious and political consequences of the act. And the assassin was not expected to survive their mission. And so this is from where the concept of fida'in arose. That is also very interesting because now we can trace the origins of modern-day suicide bombing into the actions of the assassins. The assassins were not expected to survive their assassination attempt. Essentially, they were supposed to be mobbed and they were supposed to be killed by the enraged mob when they carried out their assassination. And they were in an altered state of mind, so maybe that also helped with the pain and the consequences of their actions. So that is maybe where the origins of modern day assassinations, of the modern day suicide bombing lies. Suicide bombing are very challenging matters for the reason that it is very difficult to stop them, because the person carrying out the suicide bombing has nothing to lose. They have been indoctrinated so completely that there is very little chance to alter the consequences of their actions. And now, as we are getting more insight into the world of terrorism, we know how suicide bombers are prepared. For example, if you are being prepared as a Muslim suicide bomber, then there are special rooms that are created. So this was a tour of this was given by some police personnel in western Pakistan, where the Taliban were formerly holed up in the former tribal areas, and there was a special room that they showed to the media representatives who were visiting that area, which was used to train suicide bombers. So essentially, would-be suicide bombers, usually these were young boys, they'd be brought to that room, and in that room you'd have pictures of Bollywood celebrities, or you'd have romantic poetry, and the boys would be urged to stay in that room for many days, 4 or 5 days, and so that they could absorb what it meant to be in paradise. There would be background wallpaper in the rooms that had valleys, and there would be rivers flowing of milk and honey and wine. And so essentially their entire life and their entire state of mind was altered in that way to encourage them to go out and sacrifice themselves for an ulterior motive. And all of this can be traced back to the actions of the Assassin Brotherhood, on which this video game is based. Now that is the Assassin Brotherhood. Let us talk about the Knights Templar. The Knights Templar have again become very famous in the past couple of decades, largely due to the book written by Dan Brown called The Da Vinci Code, in which they play a prominent role. The Knights Templar, they were an order of Catholics. It was a military order, and it was one of the most wealthy and popular Western Christian military orders. They were headquartered in Jerusalem, and they existed for nearly 2 centuries. Now, the Knights Templar became a favored charity throughout Christendom, and so for this reason they grew very rapidly. And now they were a military order. Their main action was to carry out the mission entrusted to them and to take part in the Crusades and to strive their utmost to establish Christian rule in the Holy Land. However, 90% of the Knights Templar order was non-military personnel, and a large number of that non-military personnel was engaged in banking and handling of finances, and they developed some extremely advanced banking techniques for that time. And so in that way, they have retained their wealth over the years. Even to this day, you'll find a dedicated website managed by the Knights Templar order, in which they recount their history and they recount the legacy that their order has left. So in that way, it is a very special entity, in my opinion. And what does Assassin's Creed do? It pits these two entities against each other, the Shia Muslims against the Western Catholics of the Knights Templar order. And the result that we get from this is very interesting, because there is some difference in interpretation of the video game compared to reality. So one very important thing of the Assassin's Creed genre, the Assassin's Creed franchise, is that these are stealth games. So your main job as an assassin is to not attract attention. That is the main objective of the video game. Otherwise, there is no way that you can complete your missions and complete your tasks. So stealth is a very important, maybe the central component of the video game. But the difference between the original assassins of the Nizari Ismaili order and the Assassin's Creed video game is that the original assassins went into a mission with the understanding that they would die, that they would be fida'in, that they were sacrificing themselves for a higher purpose, the purpose of their order. So this is a very huge contrast with the video game, because in the video game, stealth is the main mission. So that's a very interesting observation. Another very interesting observation that you'll see in the Assassin's Creed video game is that there's an extreme lack of religious elements to it. Now, the assassins of the Holy Land, they were a religious organization. They were a Shia organization. However, there is no religious connotations to Shiaism associated with the Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. And I think there's a very valid reason for that, because you cannot have religious elements in video games. That would create too much controversy. And after the Sandy Hook school shooting, and after myriad events in which some people believe that it was video games that inspired people to carry out violent actions, I think the creators of this video game thought it best to not include any religious connotations in this video game. Also, a very important observation in the same vein is that there are no drugs in the video game. So the assassins, their original name were the Hashashins, that is derived from the drug hashish. So the very origins of this brotherhood, of this organization, lies in the use of drugs and mind-altering substances. But you can't introduce that into a video game either, because that could go against laws, that would go against morals, that would go against ethics. Mostly it's kids that play video games, so you can't be introducing them to drugs. It could be a gateway to things that are worse. So these are some of the contrasts that you'll see between the video game and between the real Assassin's Creed that existed many, many years ago. But it's very interesting because these were elements that definitely are associated with the Crusades, and that these elements are being reinterpreted in a modern context. That means that the Crusades were in fact a very extraordinary time period, because they still retain relevance to this day. So that was the Assassin's Creed video game. Now I'd like to talk about another video game that I played, and in which the Crusades and events surrounding the Crusades played a large part. That is the Age of Empires franchise, specifically the second installment in this franchise, Age of Empires 2. So Age of Empires is very different from Assassin's Creed. Assassin's Creed is a stealth fighter video game, but Age of Empires is a tactical strategy and turn-based game in which you have to create your own colony, you have to create your own empire of sorts, you have to train units, and then you pit them in battle against each other. So it's very much like a world builder sort of video game. And so you have units, some are combatant units, you have knights, you have paladins, you have skirmishers, you have men-at-arms, and in that same vein, you also have machinery, so you have battering rams, you have trebuchets, and so then you use these things to wage war against each other. And you have some very important buildings. For example, your town hall is the central building. If your enemy captures your town hall, then you lose the game. So one very interesting unit in the Age of Empires 2 video game is the Crusader Knight. The Crusader Knight cannot be converted by enemy monks. So that's very interesting. What a monk can do is that if there's a unit fighting on your enemy side, the monk can go up to that unit, they can wave their arms around, essentially they're chanting to that unit, and the unit then they turn sides and they start fighting for you. The Crusader Knight cannot be converted. That's very interesting, because that gives us an idea about how a Crusader is already heavily inspired by their mission, and the understanding over here is that they are incorruptible and they cannot be converted by the enemy in order to fight for them. The robes that they wear, the dress that the Crusader Knights wear, they are very symbolic of their historical attire. Mostly it's plain. They wear white robes and then they have a shield. That is very typical of crusading orders, and it has a black cross on it. So this was the black cross that was used by the Teutonic Knights. Now that was a bit about the units, the fighting units that you use. There are also technologies in Age of Empires, technologies that help you increase your production. So it's like a whole enterprise, like running a city. So in order to train units, you need to have equipment for them, you need to have food for them, you need to be able to invest in a unit before they can start fighting for you. So one very important and very interesting, more interesting than important technology that you have is called the High Crusade. So the detail that goes with the High Crusade is as follows. The Knights of St. John call for a new world crusade. You receive a shipment of 8 hoop throwers from Malta, and all hoop throwers are improved. This use of trained personnel means all your other units have fewer hit points from now. So essentially, what has happened is that there's an investment that has come in, and from Europe some investment has poured in, and now that has improved your performance in the video game. And that is also very interesting because it ties into the larger idea of how the Crusades were a European feud project from the very beginning. Now, what happens in these videos? You just don't go in and you just don't start building your cities. You actually fight campaigns. So there are missions that you have to complete using a turn-based method. So one of the campaigns is called Saladin, of course, based off the life and times of the very famous Muslim commander Saladin. So in this campaign, you play as Saladin, and Saladin is basically a cavalry hero, so he's presented with his horse. Now, I'd like to very specifically talk about one mission, which is called Horns of Hattin. Now, Horns of Hattin is based off the Battle of Hattin. This is an extremely important battle in the history of the Crusades. It took place in the year 1187. And this could be thought of as the turning point for the Crusades. The Crusaders, they were holding some very important cities, but it was in the Third Crusade that Saladin successfully managed to retake Jerusalem from the Crusaders. So what happened in this battle? Essentially, he laid siege to Tiberias, which was a fortification in which the emperor's wife was housed. And so Guy de Luzine and his serviceman, Reynold of Chatillon, a very important individual, the Prince of Antioch, who is considered to be a very cruel person as well, they rode towards Tiberias. Saladin had laid a trap for the crusading forces, and when they started to move towards the direction of Tiberias, he strategically placed his army in between the water supply at the springs of Kafir Hattan, and in that way the Crusaders were cut off from the water supply. And so this is the sort of introduction description that went with the Age of Empires campaign called the Horns of Hattin. Each battle was preceded by a campaign just to let you know where you were in history, what was going on. So it was not just senseless fighting, but essentially there was a background story to the narratives of what was going on. So it's being told from the point of view of a captive in Saladin's camp. So it goes like this. Galilee, year 20 of my capture. Last night we rode into a sandstorm. The men dared not open their mouths to speak. We clung to the necks of horses or camels while waves of sand rose and fell around us. The Saracens have pursued a large force of Europeans into the desert. The Crusaders carry with them a relic, a piece of the true cross. Capturing this artifact will deal a severe blow to the morale of Saladin's Christian foes. I asked Saladin why we were here, miles from civilization and water. He said, to bring crimson death to the blue-eyed enemy. The huge Crusader army has halted to make it stand beneath the two peaks called the Horns of Hattin. At the horns is only a single pool of water, and Saladin controls it. At night, the Saracens ride out and extravagantly pour out vessels of water into the sand within sight of the thirst-crazed Europeans. It is cruelty worthy of a crusader. I think that's an extremely interesting description. There's lots of emotions in there, and it seems very, very authentic. And it's an important battle. Saladin captures Guy de Luzine and Reynold of Chatillon. And Saladin obviously is the paramount of chivalry, so he treats Guy de Luzine, the king of Jerusalem, with a lot of piety, and he spares his life. But Reynold of Chatillon, he has a reputation for being a cruel person, and Saladin has no intention of sparing him, and so he dies for his crimes. So that is sort of to give you a sense of how the Crusades are being portrayed in the Age of Empires too. You have campaigns, you have units, you have power-ups such as the High Crusade power-up that I talked about. Similar to Saladin's campaign, you also have Frederick Barbarossa's campaign. So if you know the story of Frederick Barbarossa, it's very anticlimactic because he drowned himself while he was supposedly bathing in a river. So his campaign detail goes like this in the Age of Empires. It says, Barbarossa's weary army had marched for hundreds of miles through the cracked mountains in the heat of July. So when it stumbled upon the Gokshu River, the men were astonished and grateful. Barbarossa himself could not resist, plunging into the cold water without even pausing to remove his armor. To the disbelief of the surviving troops, Barbarossa drowned. Some said the emperor could not swim in his plate armors. Others believed his 67-year-old heart had finally given up. Regardless of the exact cause of death, Barbarossa's crusade ended there on June 10th, 1190. The Holy Roman Emperor was gone. So in this way, you can see that this is a very interesting way to explore history, in which you take part in the battles, but you are being governed by larger ideas. So irrespective of how well you play Barbarossa's campaign, you cannot change history in this video game. Barbarossa does die towards the end, and you are sort of a spectator on the side. You do get a front side seat, but history is charting the course over here, and you are the observer. So this was my analysis of the Crusades in video games. I hope this was useful, and I hope this helps us understand more about the Crusades and their interpretation in modern day mediums of communication. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.